Hi, hello. It's been a while, I know. I've been busy, I've been sick, I lost my voice at one point. Hence the tea. I hope you've got a hot bevy of your own. I made this mug for my then boyfriend, now husband, at a Color Me Mine. It's nice to be back. Time is quickly passing. I cannot believe that next week is Thanksgiving. I'm gonna be gone all week for my annual camping trip. And at this point, I was wondering if I should just do like an October, November wrap up. But I've been so consistent all year long, and I'm a little OCD about this. Seeing on my video grid having a monthly wrap up for each month, and I don't want to mess that up. So, better late than never. Let's talk about the 14 books that I read in October. All right, last month in September, I read Tiffany McDaniel's The Summer That Melted Everything, which had passages in each chapter quoting Paradise Lost by John Milton. And I was so moved by that book. Each quote that acted as a chapter epigraph McDaniel used from Paradise Lost sets up like the tone of that chapter, and the whole book explores life, good and evil, the choices that we make, humanity. There's also been many books that I've read over the past couple years and have loved, like Phuc Tran's really good memoir, all referencing Paradise Lost. I've never read Paradise Lost. I grew up with a shitty American public education. I wasn't smart enough to get into like honors or AP lit or English, and this just was eluded by my radar growing up into adulthood, and I only really heard about this from other books, such as those that I've mentioned. So obviously I'm intrigued. I'm like, what is this book about? I must read this. Yeah, it's basically reading a Bible. It's reading the Bible. It is difficult textbook reading. I kind of heard from the ether, from some of you lovely commenters commenting, that you kind of have to prep to read this book. And then I did watch a couple YouTube videos as prep to like bone up for this read. One of them was Benjamin McAvoy of Hardcore Literature, which I highly recommend that you go to for a much more thorough, like dedicated video of what Paradise Lost is about, because this isn't gonna be that. Like basically, as an airheaded Libra that I am, I really just read this casually. I went into it basically blind, despite all of my prep beforehand. And my key takeaway from it is I'm at a loss. I really just felt like I was reading the Bible, which I have done growing up and going to Bible study twice, 3 times a week of my adolescence. I felt like I was supposed to be reading to learn, but like my context for reading this book was to see for myself the primary source of what so many other writers that I'm admiring currently have been enamored by, have been so inspired by. The whole time I was reading it, I was trying to keep the historical context in mind, which did help me understand more. Mostly the facts that John Milton was an anti-monarchist, revolutionary. He was a rebel. He was also blind while writing this, and so all of the descriptions, all of the language used is coming from a blind man. Like, that's incredible. And honestly, I wanted to stop so many times throughout the read. And the main thing that was stimulating me, because it was a lot of Old English writing, Adam and Eve in the garden. Like, I've read this before. Why am I reading it again? Although this time it is from the perspective of Satan. So, fresh take. But what really kept me going was like the other things that I was reading during this, such as the next book that I'm going to talk about, and the thought that just so many people have read this book, and I'm not going to be not one of them. This is just such an OG work, a a primary source of inspiration from countless beloved books of the past 4 centuries. How can you ignore that? So at the moment, it still remains enigmatic for me. Like, I haven't found the exact right key to unlock all of its answers for me personally. But hey, this is only the beginning. I could always keep reading other books that cite Paradise Lost, and then I'll go, oh, hey, I remember that. I recall. Maybe I'll read it. Reread it again. And yeah, overall, how wonderful is it that I've only heard of Paradise Lost via BookTube and just reading more. I don't know how smart the rest of you are. I'm sure much more than me. But I mean, don't you find that incredible? It would be like coming across someone who's never heard of, I don't know, Shakespeare until they were like, several years into BookTube. Because that is my case for Paradise Lost. Do I recommend it? I mean, maybe if you are a writer yourself, if you're a scholar of the English language, if you love reading old-timey English lit. But yeah, I wouldn't ignore it. I read The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy, which is a short story, via library ebook. But I walked into Barnes & Noble one day and found this pretty stunning copy and felt that I couldn't go home without it. So here we are. I do plan to read the rest of these very soon. And I remember how I came to read The Death of Ivan Ilyich because in the month of October, started watching the YouTube channel Horses, like essay videos, ranging from like all different types of topics, not necessarily books, although he does use mostly nonfiction books as like resources for his videos. And there was one video of his that heavily discusses the death of Ivan Ilyich as well as other Leo Tolstoy stories. And it was so compelling, and the video was so compelling that I immediately found the ebook on Libby and basically read it in one night. And it was just jaw-dropping. It still feels so relevant, so relatable, so real. Preachy, yeah, sure, as Tolstoy is wont to be, but it's this concept of life and death, the question of what is a meaningful life, that have been themes in my current reads. And because that fit with Paradise Lost, it kept me reading it. But if the idea of Paradise Lost intimidates you, very understandably so, then I beseech you to try The Death of Ivan Ilyich. It's very short, it's very readable, and it's about how do you live a meaningful life, a meaningful, well-spent life, so that when death comes, however it may, you're able to honestly face it with acceptance. Can any of us do that today? Could I? I mean, I fight with that every single day. And my man Ivan, his thoroughly entitled, oblivious, self-absorbed character, I couldn't relate more. I felt so seen. I'm also completely guilty of his bourgeoisie behavior, or just as equally as his wife's, who is so intolerant of his death and his complaints. Oh, I loved it. I love every Tolstoy that I'm reading. I'm loving it completely. This is no exception. I highly recommend this. I'm so excited for myself that finally I'm reading The Lord of the Rings for the first time. And it's only because my library hold for the very, very famous audiobook read by Andy Serkis finally came through. So I have this old copy that belongs to my husband that I'm just using as a prop because I am completely reading via audiobook. So far I've only read The Fellowship of the Rings. This is like the whole 3 shebang in one, which is why it looks so thick. The audiobook, as everyone has stated, 'tis peak. It is so, so good. So much singing. I was not prepared for all the singing. I should have been. I mean, I've annually watched the extended versions of the trilogy, plus the Hobbit trilogy. And of course, I only allow myself one rewatch a year. Otherwise, it would just be all I watch. So I'm very familiar with the story. However, read on the page with the Andy Serkis narration, it still feels so anew. Lots more extra details. The meme quotes still hit. I feel thin, sort of stretched, like butter scraped over too much bread. Oh, that that sounds so that sounded so much that sounded like it had so much lack of gravitas than it deserves. Let me try it again. I feel thin, sort of stretched, like butter scraped over too much bread. Better? Ever since I've been listening to so many more audiobooks, I've been wanting to be a better reader myself, like a better oral reader myself. I'm not trying to rob you, I'm trying to help you. I wish it need not have happened in my time. So do I, said Gandalf. So do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. Oh, I love the way that Arwen is described. The light of all the stars were in her eyes. So yeah, no hot takes, no new revelations. I've just been admiring Andy Serkis's amazing performance, like a hobbit kid at story time, sitting on the floor mesmerized. Although in my case, it was like walking on the treadmill at my gym. There were still some scenes where even though I'm like speed walking on the treadmill, I'm still tearing up. Like the scene when Frodo thinks that he'd been so smooth the whole time preparing to leave Hobbiton, but all of his Hobbit friends knew that he was leaving and were preparing behind his back to leave with him because they weren't going to let him be alone. Oh. And just, the weight of responsibility, the power of pity, Frodo's prejudice against Gollum when he discovers that he's like distantly related to him, and his reaction to Gandalf's hot take on Gollum's sad and pitiful journey. The pull of temptation. I mean, I'm a little tearing up just like reliving my reading experience. Yeah, this still hits. This still feels so fresh, so urgent. I feel very small. The enemy is so strong and terrible. Even though this is technically fantasy, and there are mentions of dragons and wizards, the reading experience didn't feel like it's a fantasy. It felt like real life. Like, I know that the historical context of Tolkien writing this was his experience pre and during World War I, and the evil that mankind was in to be able to get themselves to that place of war, to that bottomless depth of war that we were in at that point, and that we now continue to keep facing today. Yeah, I'm trying to say that this book still feels very tethered to reality. Like, even Gandalf, who is a wizard, is a charming, natural leader whose personality feels so powerful. It's his personality that feels powerful, not like his spells and charms. But no one is infallible, not even him. Oh, and the legwork, the miles walked by all of the characters combined just to prove that the One Ring is in fact the One Ring. I mean, I'm sure if I were a first-time reader when this came out, in 1954, that I would, maybe still have some questions and some qualms, is it the One Ring? Is it the One Ring? But 2023 Yenna, who has watched these movies for, I don't know, for the past 20 years, I'm yeah, it's the ring. Yeah, I can confirm it for you. It's the ring. You don't have to keep walking. And yet, despite all of that, none of that legwork feels like a waste. All of that content fleshes out the world, and it gives context of this world. Just like in real life, there's so many minutes, so many hours in the day that we need to fill, and we do, and it all provides so much color to life. And the dwarf, hearing the names given in his own ancient tongue, looked up and met her eyes, and it seemed to him that he looked suddenly into the heart of an enemy and saw there love and understanding. Your quest stands upon the edge of a knife. Stray but a little, and it will fail to the ruin of all. Yet hope remains while all the company is true. And with that word, she held them with her eyes, and in silence looked searchingly at each of them in turn. None save Legolas and Aragorn could long endure her glance. Sam quickly blushed and hung his head. At length, the Lady Galadriel released them from her eyes, and she smiled. Talk about pressure. Talk about tackling the impossible. I mean, not just right now, but so many times in our lives, there are so many things that feel like it's an impossible task, and we can't blame our team. We have to work together. We struggle through. Scenes like that flesh out better than the film. I remember reading Game of Thrones. I was so enthralled. I would read as much as I could during my hour-long lunch breaks when I was working in retail. I needed to know what happened next. I learned every name, every house, every relation, but I'm positive that it's not just recency bias, but that my 2010s reading experience of Game of Thrones, as fun and enthralling as that was, pales in comparison to my reading experience of Lord of the Rings. Not just because of Andy Serkis, but I already can tell that this has so much more heart and truth. If you love the movies, if you love the story, I highly recommend watching the films, the extended versions. And if you're already a fan but you haven't read the books yet, I highly recommend. And via Andy Serkis performed audiobooks, if you can. Yes, this is supposed to be me. George, not yet. Speaking of death, I read Death Valley by Melissa Broder. Heavily anticipated. I'm a big fan of Melissa Broder. And I went in expecting akin to like John Mulaney's Baby J stand-up special. Like that was his sober special following his very high octane previous specials. And I feel like that's an accurate assessment. I would not recommend this to be anyone's first Melissa Broder, nor would I recommend Baby J to be anyone's first John Mulaney. This is about grief, despite the fact that nobody dies in this book. This has a whole lot of depression, although I wouldn't say trigger warnings. It is definitely about a woman spiraling hard, like spiraling down Reddit comment threads where dehumanized people online just want to feel acknowledged as human beings. This is about the messiness of life with like the backdrop of our current heavy online presence and the subsequent burnout. Searching for the orchestral quiet. And yeah, what I mean by this shouldn't be anyone's first Broder, nor should Baby J be anyone's first Mulaney. I mean, a lot of shit already went down for both Mulaney and Broder for them to get to this place. And you kind of need to be on that journey with them to get to this point where we're seeking answers here. We're looking for atonement. A lot of, am I worthy of this? Why is this my blessing and my burden? Why can't I just sleep my life away? Very introspective, a lot of internal monologue inside a cactus cathedral. I recommend this only to Broder fans because this is basically her with her heart open, tender, and raw. Not that all of her previous books weren't either, but this is just to the nth degree so. And I am happy that she's here. I'm happy that she reached this point. Like, I'm not gonna say that this was a romp, this was a fun read. It's not. It's very contemplative. It's very slow. It's very sad. It's very much, am I okay? And a lot of like going down that rabbit hole of, am I okay? So if you're prepared for that journey, by all means, dive in. You Think It, I'll Say It by Curtis Sittenfeld is a collection of stories that I also read via library audiobook, which was narrated by Emily Rankin, who sounds so much like Tina Fey, and Mark Deakins. And to be honest with you, I do not recall anything from this. Like every time I read, especially when I'm reading an audiobook, I take copious notes. Like, I try to jot down as much takeaways. I try to pull as many quotes that like resonate. So let me read through that to see if anything jogs a memory. Okay, so I wrote short stories in distinct Curtis Sittenfeld flavor. Intrinsically compulsive, snappy. It almost doesn't register or matter if a short story or a full-length novel format. I agree. It's still that easy-going, skinny vanilla latte-esque quality in the reading experience. Oh, my notes are so quippy. George. I wrote, I thought of Sally Rooney, similar in the way where I thought of Sally Rooney, where it's basically a girl constantly wondering the details of her next fuck. But why do I roll eyes at Rooney and impulsively loll and smile with Curtis Sittenfeld? Something so undeniably adorable about an awkward girl looking at her MCAT study guide before bed. She's my type, I guess. So yeah, fun, lightweight stories about neurotic, self-congratulatory women who want ski jump noses, and their other issues that goes without saying are of like the white and upper middle class variety. And that while in real life, those type of people are awful, Curtis Sittenfeld is just so good at writing them. Yes, yes. I wholeheartedly agree with my notes that I wrote. And they're all like vaguely coming back to me now. I guess I'll say I do recall enjoying the time read, but they are like a little bit forgettable. So I guess it's not like top tier Curtis Sittenfeld. It's obviously not unforgettable, but enjoyable nevertheless. If any of that appealed to you, I particularly like the skinny vanilla-esque-ness, by all means. I finally read The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, a book that I've been saying that I'll read for so damn long. Finally did it. I read both with my old copy as well as the library audiobook read by the author, whose vocal performance must be said. It is so neutral that when the shocking twists occur, I felt ambivalent. And maybe it's because I'm also like, you know, comparing it with like the very dynamic Andy Serkis performance, but like, I mean, I need a little something, I guess. I did think that it was pretty predictable, nevertheless still enjoyable and sad. There were a little too many cliches for me, like a voice that sounds like milk and honey. For me, America was a place to bury my memories. For Baba, it was a place to mourn his. Yeah, I couldn't help, like, as sad and as, you know, very relevant IRL as it may be, I couldn't help roll my eyes at how, like, everything fit together like a glove. I don't know, maybe redemption stories just aren't my thing. There was a lot going on. This is super plotty. This is a super plotty fiction about very non-fic things, which I do like. Yes, there are lots of sad beats about, and I the whole time kept thinking about the very sad IRL situation of Afghanistan. But for once, this fiction didn't do what I normally find great fiction to do, which is like painting the canvas. George, stop. Paint the canvas onto the texture of what my heart can adhere to and get me to care. Oh, and he does something that I really just hate. He turns to religion out of desperation. There was just never a moment, basically, that I didn't hate Amir, who is the main character. But yeah, there's something politically fascinating in what was unsaid. Like this book came out in 2003, 2 years after 9/11. I can't not see this as like an informative / propaganda to justify why America was in Afghanistan. And after all this time, now that I'm reading it, 20 years later, it's only been 2 years since we left and they're back to Taliban rule. Yeah, I'm not sad about having read this. It just left me frustrated for those reasons. After taking a break from Agatha Christie, I got back in with Murder in Mesopotamia, which came out in 1935. I read it via library audio, which was read by Anna Massey. She played like a small role in one of the Poirot adaptations, not even in this one. So I'm really uncertain why she read the audiobook for this. Whatever. Spectacular performance. This feels like Agatha Christie having fun with setting rules and using formulas for herself to crank out another novel, which is something that she did. Like, Poirot is not the main character in this. We're not in London. We're traveling. We're on a dig site, but her classic tropes are still there. There's a jumble of people, just not in an estate, in Baghdad, on an archaeological dig site. A woman is perceived to be immoral, but we ultimately learn that she wasn't, which is another very common Agatha Christie trope. And she was framed by a man for his own purposes. The plot itself is fun, but I don't think the book as a whole is. Of course, there are so many colonialist remarks that's a little, tough to wade through. Like the whole Arabs are lazy and the British archaeologists are obviously framed as like more cultured and superior. It's also very trite. Like, there have been multiple murders already and people are like asking to pass the butter at the dinner table. And yeah, this was in 1935, which is, I want to say, when Agatha Christie started getting into Egyptian archaeology, which was like a huge hobby of hers. So it kind of felt like, like that friend of yours who found a new obsession and just wants to tell you nonstop about it, even though you have no interest. So ultimately, this book doesn't quite work for me because while there is still that character interaction that she's usually so good at, it doesn't really sparkle here. And this also served as a reminder that though her writing usually comes across as effortless, good writing is very hard, and it felt so here. Like, this feels a little more like a writing exercise. Some of her books feel very much like she's just cranking them out for a book deal, and this doesn't. You can feel that she is passionate for this, just maybe nobody else is, or at least I'm not. It's not a hit. I read Natural Beauty by Ling Huang, which came out this year, new release. I read this via library audio, which was read by Carolyn King. This was a commentary on goopy wellness, beauty culture, weirdness of the rich in like a broody, mysterious, surreal prose with very snappy pacing. However, I didn't like it because it makes rich people, the beauty industry, too much of a boogeyman, and it's letting individuals off the hook. I hate that. It also refers to like historical events like the Cultural Revolution and its labor camps. While it's very much appreciated, but it's using its severity to give credence, to give validity to like beauty industry subjugation as a comparison. No. I really personally hate people attacking Gwyneth Paltrow as like a snake oil salesman. I don't agree. And I also find it gives her too much power. It ignores our own power of choice. Like, you don't have to buy anything. And I find it laughable that peer pressure is used to describe both something like this as like standing up against fascism. So I'm already personally like way too entrenched in these opinions of mine to make this book ultimately a not for me. It also feels like being young, very high on cocaine in New York City. Like, them's the vibes. Oh, and feeling very angry at the man. Like, I'm not there. That's not me. Oh, and I also kept thinking of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Like, it lifts a lot of that plot and tension into this book, which, I mean, you're setting yourself up for failure if you're trying to do that. Yeah, I wasn't impressed. Another new release this year, Shepherd's Delight by Charles Heathcote. It's a new book of poetry. I ordered this and read like upon delivery. It's just so nice to be in his head, in his sensibilities again. I read like everything that he wrote last year. Was it 2 years ago? Yes, his sensibilities are very much like working class, subtle emotions of adolescence, maybe a tinge of farming or like at least a rural background, and its intrinsic violences, barabend intestines, a merciful gun, the gentrification of farms and rural areas by conglomerates and like swanky B&Bs. There are a lot of millennial references like playing with a Power Ranger toy and being chastised by your dad who gripes that he never got toys for presents. It was always practical things that he was lucky to get. I am not the tears in the playground and the fear of the dark, can take the thread of a belt without an asthma attack. But fathers make mice of mountains of men, pounce like cats beneath cupboards, unearthing secrets, can wrench apart their son's ribcage with a look. I like the analogy that foxes are the Danny Oceans of the countryside. Yeah, reading his work just feels like hanging out with him, and I truly enjoy his company. I read Where I Come From, Stories from the Deep South by Rick Bragg, which I read as a library audio read by the author because I just wanted to hear Rick Bragg's voice again. I didn't find it as good as the other two Rick Bragg books that I read previously, but that's not to say that this isn't good. It's still very good. These are shorter essays. They feel a little bit more like a taste of more about food culture, racism, etc. There's like a To Kill a Mockingbird essay. I think that was the highlight. It's about his complicated relationship to that book because it villainizes poor whites, such as he, and the upper middle class Southern lawyer, Atticus Finch, is portrayed as like the average Joe to have beer with. I liked his thoughts on Charlottesville and our current events, re white supremacy in the South. I do not need a statue or a flag to know that I am Southern. I can taste it in the food, feel it in my heart, hear it in the language of my kin. Yeah, there's like good dog story that's always appreciated. His lambasting of pop country culture. Oh, the metamorphosis of trucks. Nashville hot chicken opinions, which I share, make me realize we're just old fuddy-duddies, but I degaff. Yeah, I want to live. I want to belong here. I too like a good tomato sandwich with a side of barbecue potato chips and a frosty cold glass of whole milk as a meal. Yeah, I want to love a place this much. I continue to admire Rick Bragg and everything that he writes. I read as a library ebook The Uncommon Reader, Alan Bennett's classic story about the Queen by Alan Bennett. Came out in 2007. It's like a novella. It's very short. This was a Nancy Meyers-esque lighthearted humor. This is a fantasy. It's a heartwarming, charming fantasy about the Queen being a nice, if formidable, old lady who just wants to find more time to read good books in her busy schedule. Yeah, this is very like Hallmark movie-esque. There was a Mitford Sisters reference that felt like a sign for me to read more Nancy Mitford. A lot of books, a lot of writer references that could be inspiring. Indeed, it got me out of a bit of a dry spell that I was having this month, despite it being bad. Like I don't like this. I read it happily. I found it charming, but I also found it kind of stupid. Like, I dislike the representation of the Queen and readers being like petulant children unable to function without their book/security blanket. I don't myself think of the IRL Queen like this, so it's just laughable to me to see her portrayed this way. But I get it. It's supposed to make you put yourself into the shoes of the queen as a reader. It's supposed to be about relatability. I feel like what it wants to do is to impart a sense of wonderment, of pathos uniquely found from books, using like the queen character as a gimmick. But it's full of itself. It's not working for me. I delightfully disliked it. But like, if you just want to read something cozy, something quick and light, and I don't know, you like the Queen of England, and I don't know, want to see what books are found revered amongst particular tastes, by all means. Yeah, again, I delightfully disliked it. All the Beauty in the World, The Metropolitan Museum of Art and Me by Patrick Bringley. I read as a library audiobook, read by the author, who I have to call this out. He over enunciates his T's to the point where I was wondering if the reader was an AI or an actual human. Like, I had to YouTube his interviews that he's done during his book promo tour to see if he like talked normally or if this is how he really talked. It's not. He talks normally, so I don't know why he would say Manhattan over and over again. I don't know. He just seems to be a sensitive, creative soul. I like this a lot. I did. I don't remember how I heard about this, but it was immediately available as the library audiobook. And I do always pretty much enjoy memoirs. And I think what immediately grabbed me is his immense appreciation for the quote-unquote unskilled labor force. He used to be a writer for The New Yorker, I believe, and then a devastating life event happened to him. His older brother passed away very young from terminal cancer, and it changed his life. He quit his job as a writer and became what are they called? He became a guard at the Met. It was like an act of grief. To be a writer is to think, and he didn't want to think anymore. He really just wanted like a physical job for the moment. And while he was guarding these priceless old masterpiece works of art, staring at them for hours and hours, talking with the other Met Guard Corps, getting to know all of the different personalities of all the different people, he found meaning, he found answers, he found solace, he found beauty amongst the art, the history, the culture, other people. The answer, guys, is always found in other people. I just keep running into this time and time again. This is another book that has that message of we need each other. And the writing, it is beautiful. I mean, he is a New Yorker writer after all. My earliest feeling about art was that it belonged to a kind of separate moonlit world, and this was my mother's influence. Goals. He always said his talent wasn't talent, but rather diligence born of enjoyment. There's some beautiful art writing in this book. Just like with food writing, I really enjoyed the art writing in this. And the Met is just magical. It is my favorite New York City museum. It just has everything. And I mean, who doesn't like the Cheesecake Factory? It also speaks on life in New York City during the 2000s, the camaraderie found in the Met staff, specifically the Guard Corps, which I greatly relate to coming from a retail background, and like the behind the scenes inner workings of the museum. There's a bit on fatherhood here, which I found hilarious, how succinct and kind of removed the writing feels when it comes from a father. Like, it's not as overwhelming and earth-shattering for them as it is when you read writing on motherhood from mothers. That this was just reflective, quiet, lovely. The glory of so-called unskilled jobs is that people with a fantastic range of skills and background work them. Too many visitors think of the Met as a museum of art history, where the objective is to learn about art rather than from it. Yeah, I highly recommend. I read My Husband by Maud Ventura. I mean, this has been going around the booktube, book talk, bookstagram. It's just got this fantastic painting cover by Annie Kevins. Yeah, this bitch is crazy. This has big Leo energy. Just so self-absorbed, overwhelming feelings, the love witch levels. Really paints a picture with all of the descriptions. Love all her notebooks. It was hilarious. It was pathetic. It was fun. It was funny. There's a passage where she describes what she wants if she'd had limitless options. The one time she confided in someone her truths, and then the reaction that she got, I love that whole paragraph. Like, she doesn't really want to be codependent, and she really just wants to be narcissistic. Like, she just wants to be needed. Just no matter what she'll do, she'll never be satisfied. She'll always be doubtful, have FOMO, be emotionally stunted, raging emo. I really enjoyed this. I had so much fun. Having said that, I really disliked the epilogue, like, twist. It just made it kind of moot. Like, it made everything so far, this like frolicking roller coaster, feel flat at the end. But yeah, it's not that many pages. It's a fast read. I read this in a day. This is a romp. I highly recommend, if anything, for the laughs. And finally, I read Exalted by Anna Dorn. This book and My Husband, I liked both enough. I read them via a library book, and I liked them both enough to purchase my own hard copies. And this book in particular, I just found it to be like the perfect size. It fits like this in my hands. I love this cover. And this just had great, hot, sunny October LA vibes. Oh, Anna Dorn writes LA so well. This was almost like a 2020 version of the L Word. I know that they have a reboot. I haven't seen it, but just like from what I recall of the L Word, like that LA vibe is like this. I love the mirroring of the two main characters, even though I know that that's a device. It works for me. They're the same person, just in different generations. And I disliked both women equally. Not to say that this was a hate read. I loved the reading experience. This is also a romp. It's so fun. Even though it's coming after the airheaded Libras like myself. This has big Scorpio energy. Everyone just wants to hear they're special in a very specific language. And astrology is a perfectly nebulous vehicle for this. I remember why I'm so drawn to astrology, because it gives me an out for being myself. Freud is just astrology for men. Love that. I don't love how often I storm out of places, but sometimes there's just no other way to get your point across. I wake up with the sense that I did something wrong last night, but I can't exactly put my finger on what it was. At this point, the feeling is so familiar, it could just be called mourning. I'm 29. Coke is for children. This is hilarious. Rollicking. There's a cat named Lydia. Oh, it has that same acerbic, glib wit like Sloane Crosley. I really enjoyed this. Highly recommend. That's everything I read in October. Not so much spooky season, scary ghost stories, etc., but more morbid, like death. We all die. It's fair to say these days that existential feelings are on a lot of people's minds. Free Palestine. I hope all of your October reading lives went well, that your November reading lives are going well. I hope you stay safe and stay free. Thank you for watching. Until next time.